Dad says, going over the lugger's side with our New Year's presents under his arm, and young Lestrange holding the lantern. I just do wish that those folk, which make war so easy, had to run one cargo a month all this winter. It'd show 'em what honest work means. Well, I've warned ye, said Uncle Aurette. I'll be slipping off now before your revenue cutter comes. Give my love to sister and take care of the kegs. It's thickening to southward. I remember him waving to us and young Stephen Lestrange blowing out the lantern. By the time we'd fished up the kegs, the fog came down so thick, Dad judged it risky for me to row 'em ashore, even though we could hear the ponies stamping on the beach. So he and Uncle Lot took the dinghy and left me in the smack, playing on the fiddle to guide 'em back. Presently I heard guns. 2 of 'em sounded mighty like Uncle Aurette's 3-pounders. He didn't go naked about the seas after dark. Then come more, which I reckoned was Captain Giddens in the revenue cutter. He was open-handed with his compliments, but he would lay his guns himself. I stopped fiddling to listen, and I heard a whole skyful of French up in the fog, and Highbow come down on top of the smack. I hadn't time to call or think. I remember the smack heeling over, and me standing on the gunwale pushing against the ship's side as if I hoped to bear her off. Then the square of the open port, with a lantern in it, slid by in front of my nose. I kicked back on our gunwale as it went under and slipped through that port into the French ship, me and my fiddle. Gracious, said Una, what an adventure. Didn't anybody see you come in? Said Dan. There wasn't anyone there. I'd made use of an orlop deck port. That's the next deck below the gun deck, which by rights should not have been open at all. The crew was standing by their guns up above. I rolled on to a pile of dunnage in the dark, and I went to sleep. When I woke, men was talking all around me, telling each other their names and sorrows, just like Dad told me pressed men used to talk in the last war. Pretty soon I'd made out they'd all been above board together by the press gangs and left to sort themselves. The ship, she was the Embuscade, a 36-gun Republican frigate. Captain Jean-Baptiste Bompard was 2 days out of Le Havre, going to the United States with a Republican French ambassador of the name of Genet. They had been up all night clearing for action on account of hearing guns in the fog. Uncle Aurette and Captain Giddens must have been passing the time of day with each other off New Haven, and the frigate had drifted past them. She never known she'd run down our smack. Seeing so many aboard was total strangers to each other. I thought one more mightn't be noticed. So I put on Aunt Cecile's red cap on the back of my head and my hands in my pockets like the rest. And as we French say, I circulated until I found the galley. What? Here's one of 'em that isn't sick, says a cook. Take his breakfast to Citizen Bompard. I carried the tray to the captain, but I didn't call this Bompard citizen. Oh no. Mon Capitaine was my little word, same as Uncle Aurette used to answer in King Louis's Navy. Bompard, he liked it. He took me on for captain servant, and after that no one asked questions, and thus I got good victuals and light work all the way across to America. He talked a heap of politics, and so did his officers, and when this Ambassador Genet got rid of his land stomach and laid down the law after dinner, a rook's parliament was nothing compared to their cabin. I learned to know most of the men which had worked in the French Revolution, through waiting at table and hearing talk about 'em. One of our forecastle 6-pounders was called Danon, and the other Marat. I used to play the fiddle between 'em, sitting on the capstan. Day in and day out, Bompard and Monsieur Genet talked of what France had done, and now the United States was going to join her to finish off the English in this war. Monsieur Genet said he'd just about make the United States fight for France. He was a rude common man, but I liked listening. I always helped drink any healths that was proposed, especially Citizen Danton's, who'd cut off King Louis's head. And all Englishmen might have been shocked, but that's where my French blood saved me. It didn't save me from getting a dose of ship's fever, though. The week before we put Monsieur Genet ashore at Charleston, and what was left of me after bleeding and pills took the dumb horrors from living 'tween decks. The surgeon, Kerrigan was his name, kept me down there to help him with his plasters. I was too weak to wait on Bompard. I don't remember much of any account for the next few weeks, till I smelled lilacs, and I looked out of the port, and we was moored to a wharf edge, and there was a town of fine gardens and red brick houses, all the green leaves of God's world waiting for me outside. "What's this?" I said to the sick bay man, old Pierre Thimpage he was. "Philadelphia," said Pierre. "You've missed it all. We're sailing next week." I just turned round and cried for longing to be amongst the laylocks. "If that's your trouble," says old Pierre, "you go straight ashore. None'll hinder you. They're all gone mad on these coasts, French and American together. 'Tisn't my notion of war." Pierre was an old King Louis man. My legs was pretty tottily, but I made shift to go on deck, which it was like a fair. The frigate was crowded with fine gentlemen and ladies pouring in and out. They sung and they waved French flags, while Captain Bompard and his officers, yes, some of the men, speechified to all and sundry about war with England. They shouted, "Down with England! Down with Washington! Hurrah for France and the Republic!" I couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to get out from that crunch of swords and petticoats and sit in a field. One of the gentlemen said to me, "Is that a genuine cap of Liberty you're wearing?" 'Twas Aunt Cecile's red one, and pretty near wore out. "Oh yes," I says, "straight from France." "I'll give you a shilling for it," he says, and with that money in my hand and my fiddle under my arm, I squeezed past the entry port and went ashore. It was like a dream. Meadows, trees, flowers, birds, houses, and people all different. I sat me down in a meadow and fiddled a bit, and then I went in and out of the streets, looking and smelling and touching, like a little dog at a fair. Fine folks was sitting on a white stone doorstep of their houses, and a girl threw me a handful of laylock sprays, and when I said merci without thinking, she said she loved the French. They all was the fashion in the city. I saw more tricolor flags in Philadelphia than I'd ever seen in Bourgogne, and everyone was shouting for war with England. A crowd of folks was cheering after our French ambassador, that same Monsieur Genet, which we'd left at Charleston. He was a horseback behaving as if the place belonged to him and commanding all and sundry to fight the British, but I'd heard that before. I got into a long straight street as wide as the Broyal where gentlemen was racing horses. I'm fond of horses. Nobody hindered 'em, and a man told me it was called Race Street of that purpose. When I followed some black niggers which I had never seen close before, but I left them to run after a great proud copper-faced man with feathers in his hair and a red blanket trailing behind him. A man told me he was a real red Indian called Red Jacket, and I followed him into an alleyway off Race Street by 2nd Street where there was a fiddle playing. I'm fond of fiddling. The Indian stopped at the baker's shop, Conrad Gerhard's it was, and bought some sugary cakes. Hearing what the price was, I was going to have some too, but the Indian asked me in English if I was hungry. "Oh yes," I says. I must have looked a sore scrattel. He opens a door on the staircase and leads the way up. We walked into a dirty little room full of flutes and fiddles, and a fat man fiddling by the window in a smell of cheese and medicines fit to knock you down. I was knocked down too, for the fat man jumped up and hit me a smack in the face. I fell against the old spinet covered with pill boxes, and the pills rolled about on the floor. The Indian never moved an eyelid. "Pick up the pills! Pick up the pills!" the fat man screeches. I started picking 'em up, hundreds of 'em, meaning to run out under the Indian's arm, but I came on giddy all over and I sat down. The fat man went back to his fiddling. "Toby," says the Indian after a while, "I brought the boy to be fed, not hit." "What?" says Toby. "I thought it was Gert Squantfelder." He put down his fiddle and took a look at me. "Himmel," he says, "I've hit the wrong boy. It's not the new boy. Why are you not the new boy? Why are you not Gert Squantfelder?" "I don't know," I said. "The gentleman in the pink blanket brought me." Says the Indian, He's hungry, Toby. Christians always feed the hungry, so I bring him." "You should have said that first," said